everyone. How are you doing? How is everybody?
Welcome. I hope you've been enjoying BABSCon. And first off, I want to say, on behalf of staff, we really appreciate you attending. And also, as one of the exec staff, I want to thank all the other gophers and staffers who've been making this convention happen for all the hard work they've put in. They've been up straight, some even 24 hours, just putting in all this work. So make sure you give them a round of applause before we start. So
they love cookies.
Yeah, and cookies.
Give them cookies.
Give them cookies. If you, you might know me in the fandom as Chocolate Pony or South Park Taoist on DeviantArt. I am the head of design for BABSCon, and I love art, and I love the art of storytelling. I also love tarot. With me is one of my team members from design team.
I'm the left foot of the design team. He's the head.
And his boyfriend.
I'm the backpack of the design team.
And since I am normally more of an academic, I tend to go on tangents about Alan Moore and more historical stuff, so they are here to provide any humor if my presentation starts sounding like a dull academic thesis. So let's just start off with why I chose the tarot. The tarot is a very, very unique structure for looking how things work and how things are organized. If you look at the history of man, or even the history of the past century, you'll see certain eras repeating themselves throughout history. You'll always have a period of growth. You'll always have a dark age. After every dark age, you have a period that's called a renaissance. After every renaissance, you have an industrial age, and it goes on in a cycle. Yes. That is true. And rhythm actually connects with the original theory that this was called by the Greek philosophers. They called it the harmony of spheres, or it's very similar to the elements of harmony, which is something that kind of fascinates me because I noticed even though My Little Pony is not specifically based on the tarot, there is a lot of influence from a lot of the more magical elements of the tarot on art itself. In fact, if you notice the star card, the symbol for the star card is the exact symbol of Twilight Sparkle's cutie mark. And also, it's a coincidence that the original idea for the tarot was from was created by a magician known as Dr. Faust, and he sold his soul to the devil for all worldly knowledge. And you could,
Illuminati.
I guess, this is some...
maybe it might be a coincidence that the creator of Gen 4 is named Lauren Faust. But let's just get things quickly started. So the start of every journey starts with the Fool card. This Fool represents infinite potential. It represents untapped knowledge. If you have seen my My Little Pony tarot set circling around the con or in the vendor hall, you'll see that I started the Fool card with Derpy. Now, a lot of people think I chose Derpy because she's kind of a foolish pony, she's kind of silly, but there's also another reason. This fandom kind of started because people noticed Derpy. It was the initial board readers on 4chan that noticed Derpy and started promoting her and made her kind of mascot of the fandom that kind of sparked all this creativity we have now. If it wasn't for Derpy, we probably wouldn't even have this convention right now. So when you think of the Fool, it doesn't mean specifically foolish, it just means infinite potential. And I want to start at a period of human history when we were just coming off the previous era and onto what we know known as the modern era. I chose the year specifically 1911 because that's a perfect era in which the British Victorian era ends. The Qin Dynasty falls in China, and the Meiji era for Japan also gave away. Specifically, I want to choose the date October 10th, 1911, because this is exactly 99 years before the airing of MLP's Gen 4.
To the day.
To the day. This is the very day that the Chinese rose up against the imperial forces and overthrew the Manchurian emperor and wanted to create a country that focused more on art and creative commerce, because before then, the Manchus were oppressing the Chinese from creating their own original art, original content. They were forced to kind of replicate the exact same stuff over and over again. So this was kind of a symbol for new cultural shift and uprising. Sadly, however, the communists took over, so that didn't really happen. But when you look at the idea of art and storytelling, art is known as, if you look at the history of magic, for example, magic has always been known in every single culture as the art. If you look at terms we use for magic and art, they are nearly synonymous. So for example, in writing, we use grammar. For magic, you have a grimoire, a book of spells. When you cast a spell, you're also spelling something. The word for media is also the word for medium, someone who could communicate between two worlds. So art and magic have been intertwined since the beginning of human history. In fact, the first artists were shamans who were living in caves doing cave paintings. So you have a connection of art and magic being synonymous in the past, and might be literally synonymous now, because if you think of magic, magic is basically the creation of symbols or the arrangement of words and visual images to change the consciousness of a person's mind. And when you think about that, it's not just simply casting a spell. When you read a book, when you look at a comic, when you listen to music, or when you watch a movie, you feel certain emotions. Sometimes it might change your philosophical views, your political views. So the idea of keeping art unrestricted is very, very important, because art can start revolutions, it can inspire people, and even influence people, much like everyone here going to a pony convention and partaking in this exchange of art. In fact, this idea of exchanging art, fandom, has been in existence as early as art. Because how did stories continue from one generation to the other? You would have shamans telling stories, and each time a new generation of shaman would want to retell the story, they'll probably pick out some of their favorite characters, add new backstory, and you will have this cycle going forward over and over again. So the idea of fandom, art, and magic are closely intertwined, and these are elements that are very important within the MLP community.
So, sorry, if there is this intertwinement, if magic is art, then does that mean that art is friendship?
See? So, and with all those magical coincidences, not only on October 10th, 1911, 99 years before My Little Pony era, did the Chinese Revolution happen, it was also the day Peter Pan was published. So this is the very first work we're going to look at. I'm going to quickly go through these, talk about what elements I liked and what they added to culture. Since this is a 1-hour panel, I'm going to try to go through them as quickly as possible. If you guys have any questions about any specific one, raise your hands and I could continue. But we're going to start with what this new journey's brought us. Before the modern era, during the Victorian era, art was storytelling and art was kind of exclusively for the upper class, and it was during this time printing became cheaper. The middle class people could start afford to see plays. We had the idea of printing stories on cheap paper known as the pulps. This is where comic books also kind of got started. So now you have the middle and lower classes having access to this new medium. And when you have access to the new medium, it inspires new types of creation. Before then, actually, the only people who read were upper class people. So these were people who kind of liked the works of Jane Austen's, and this is actually where modern fandom started. You had middle class people reading Jane Austen books saying, hey, she's talking about our middle class lives like they're as important as the upper class people. We should form book clubs and talk about how important our lives are. So this is kind of where you get the first fandoms, along with Sherlock Holmes fandoms. So many different fandoms started around this time, and this is kind of what sparked this new boom in creation, along with new innovations in technology that we have come up with.
Could you imagine the 19-teens Jane Austen fan fiction they must have written?
So during this time,
brassiere is
yeah. Imagine the cosplay too. So during this time, people started. This is the start of really the start of the Industrial Revolution. So we see people shifting between worlds. Before then, we were kind of more of a spiritual world. When we started shifting to more industry, this is when the material world became more important. So money, resources. However, after World War I started and we started seeing carnage on a massive scale, this is where we got a resurgence in spiritualism. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books, really started partaking in this. So we started seeing a split between two worlds. People who really wanted to partake in what was natural, what was material, what was physical, and people who wanted to partake in the abstract. So people who partook in the abstract started to form their own little cults, magic groups. The Lima became really important. This is where the modern tarot deck came from. People who were members of the Golden Dawn creating their own deck. Originally, these tarot decks were supposed to be personal to you. However, when Rider Waite made their deck, everyone started copying it. So it's kind of analogous to fan art and fan fiction. The purpose of fan fiction and fandom in this context is you want to improve what came before. It's like evolution. You adapt to new times, you change structure to better suit the environment. However, when you repeat the exact same thing again and again, it's like inbreeding. You have some really, really ugly looking children. So you look at the modern tarot deck.
We would know.
Basically, but you look at the modern tarot deck, and it's the exact same thing that was printed 100 years ago. There's really been nothing new. Everyone uses that same structure. It's supposed to be something that's personal. And that becomes something that these two worlds kind of divide in. For one, people who partake in art, like creation, like innovation, they try to push the medium, create new types of stories. On the other hand, you had people who were purely fans who took in it for escapism. And when you partake in escapism, it just basically repeats the exact same thing over and over. I'm going to talk about that when we move to the Silver Age of comics. So next card we're going to move to is the Empress. This is exactly 10 years since the start of our journey. This is where we have the birth of modernism. So we have basically the first modern novels being written around this time. James Joyce is kind of known as the start of the modernist movement, along with Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot. When you look at the Empress card normally means birth or rebirth. And you kind of see the birth of a new novel-making industry around this time, especially with the stream of consciousness storytelling. So the next card we have is 4. 4 represents foundation for the Emperor. And when you think of foundations, you could think the 4 corners of the house, the 4 elements, the 4 codons for the DNA strand. This is really where we start getting modern genres. This is where we started getting more experimentation in storytelling. This is where the Lost Generation came. So people who wrote Great Gatsby, the first television shows started coming around this time, the first experimental films, trying to, instead of adapting movies from plays until movies, they started trying to see what can we do with the film medium that can't be done on play. And when you actually look at the number 4, it's kind of symbolic, especially with the fandom, because 4 represents foundation, and basically the foundation of this fandom was Gen 4. So next card we have is the Hierophant. Hierophant represents knowledge, obtaining knowledge or losing knowledge. This is where we start trying to explore old ways. This is where we have the hero's journey started being reused again. This is also the time when we start trying to explore the world and fill in all the corners of the map. What happened is we now have this boom of knowledge. The corners of the earth are shrinking, yet people are still afraid of knowledge. Knowledge might be a dangerous thing. This is where we have H.P. Lovecraft writing Mountains of Madness, talking about the dangers of worldly knowledge, similar to what Dr. Faust traded his soul to the devil for. But what's interesting about Lovecraft is he's partaking in the same literary game, the same writing of fan fiction. You may not know, but Edgar Allan Poe's only novel was the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. He wrote this story about a man who started sailing south to the Antarctic. He ended the story before he reached the Antarctic. Jules Verne loved that story so much, he continued the story by having that ship land in the Antarctic and start walking towards the center of the South Pole. They stopped because they were blocked by the Iron Mountains, which made their compasses go crazy. H.P. Lovecraft loved that story so much he turned the Iron Mountains into the Mountains of Madness. And since then, we had everyone partaking in the Cthulhu mythos, trying to continue the same story, building off something previously existing, but also adding their own new tropes and narratives. This is where you get innovation in art and storytelling. Next card I want to quickly talk about is the Lover's card. Lover usually represents reunion or pairing of two things. When you think of the earliest art forms, the very first art were drawn by shamans on the walls of caves. When you look at that,
Cave of LaSalle, yeah.
when you look at that picture of the ox, that ox is not just a drawing of an ox, it's also the word for ox. Since then, words became more and more abstract, and visual representations became more and more literal. So we finally get a separation between the two, where we have the very, very abstract words and the very, very literal images. There were attempts to reunite images and words many times throughout history. You had hieroglyphics, you have the illustrated scrolls, you had the Imaki text. It was only around this time period where we started combining both, where they worked effectively with each other. The first was credited as the first modern comic strip is The Yellow Kid. And you could see this is the first instance, well, we had word bubbles before then, but this is the first instance we have word bubbles used in sequence, and where the sequences matched each other and actually went into a chronological structure.
I can't figure out if this is racist or not.
He's actually Spanish.
So yes?
Not racist.
I don't know. I don't know. I would
It's
know.
still
I would
up
be
in the
offended
air.
if it was. You know?
Okay, that's good enough for me.
This is definitely around the time where we get the birth of not just a new medium, but a reuse of a new genre. It's very, very interesting because if you look at any medium today, if you look at film, television, or novels, vastly different genres. You can have detective, horror, any type of story. But with comic books, it seems to be largely confined 99% to just one genre, the superhero genre. I see we have Spider-Man in the background there too. And this is because before then, we had a lot of time to develop these new mediums. Now that we are in an age where information is rapidly going, once we find something that works, we just stick to it and use it over and over again. We don't try to experiment. Experimentation is bad because it can end in bankruptcy or failures. So once the comic book industry realized, hey, superheroes sell, all comic books became superhero comics.
Inbreeding.
Inbreeding, exactly. Next, we have the Chariot card. Chariot represents new journeys, going on a journey. This is the time when we had the Great Depression and the Western migration. This is where we got a lot of authors like William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway penning their great epic novels. This was the time period where people were trying to create what is known as the Great American Novel, something that, yes? Take your time. Yeah? Okay.
Your great-grandfather was
cool.
in Metallica?
What?
Don't worry, I know the real story.
But this is where, because penning the Great American Novel was something that was seen as a high art form.
So rad.
Yeah.
That's funny.
What? Oh, that's still grapes wrong? Never mind.
Well, now I'm
Anyways.
expecting graphs.
This is where the literary art form kind of was considered high art because they were trying to tell something that was much grander, trying to tell the great American story. And this is when you started seeing not just, you started seeing the separation between distinct mediums and genre. You started having more literary works that became more and more highbrow. And you had things that were considered pop culture or consumer culture, something more for entertainment that wasn't really meant to stimulate the mind. Yes? Is someone talking? Or? Oh, okay, no worries. So next we have what's known as a strength card, or it's also known as the adjustment in the Thoth deck. But this is exactly now 30 years since the start of our journey. It's now 1941. This is now the death of the age of modernism. Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, two great figures of this time period, passed away, and now we are moving toward, we're kind of saying farewell to a previous era and a previous medium and welcoming a new medium. This is where film started booming, and we started seeing cinema and film treated as an art form on the same level as literature. especially because of works like Citizen Kane and Casablanca. In fact, Citizen Kane has now kind of become synonymous with the greatest work of blank and blank.
All thanks to Orson Welles. We know of a remote farm in Lincolnshire.
That's not bad. Now, as we're moving faster and faster since past this period, we are now moving to the Cold War. This is where America is becoming more and more isolationist, trying to preserve what's known as American culture. But this is also the 40 years past the start of our journey, and this is now where we start seeing the birth of new mediums being used. This is the rise of television. This is where we start getting our first shows like I Love Lucy. This is where books that kind of dealt with the spirit or philosophy started becoming big. So we have Catcher in the Rye. On one side, we also have works like Ayn Rand trying to promote things like objectivism. We also have other authors like L. Ron Hubbard writing Dianetics. So this is, I'm not gonna talk about Scientology, don't worry.
Good.
I'm a Scientologist, just kidding.
It's not, no.
We all worship Tom Cruise.
Don't worry.
So, but this is where now we're kind of getting back where, okay, stories are not just meant for entertainment. They maybe can serve a higher purpose. She created an entire philosophical movement based on her one work. L. Ron Hubbard created an entire religion that's worth $5 billion right now just through trying to write changing his science fiction stories from things that were meant to be kind of a cheap read to something that he thought was the philosophical meaning of life. And in his case, the secret of Scientology is the main constant is survive. It's kind of true, because if you think about every single organism in the world, from the lowest cell to the highest human, everyone wants to survive. And when you think about that, art and storytelling, what is art and storytelling? It needs to live, it needs to readapt, reimagine itself, so basically evolving, and if it doesn't work, then it dies off. Same thing as every single organism, so by that definition, art is also a living organism.
Thank goodness Call Me Maybe died. Beautiful extinction.
Beautiful.
As we start moving faster and faster, we now reach the wheel card. Wheel represents new opportunities, new chances. This is where we get the rise of not just fantasy and science fiction genres, but the Silver Age of comics, the age of comics that kind of defined an era. This is when you think of superheroes, all the superheroes that are really big today were not really created in the Gold Age. People kind of forget about the Gold Age. It's really the Silver Age. Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Stan Lee. This is where we get the Lord of the Rings epic being penned. This is where we get Doctor Who and Star Trek, now science fiction is kind of coming onto the television medium. And this is where we kind of get another division. As we see, this is a long tree that keeps on dividing off.
Michael Moorcock's Epic Poo.
Yes, Epic Poo.
It gets me every time.
Okay, he laughs at this part every time, but this is where we get a division. Beforehand, science fiction and fantasy kind of set nice and cozy with each other. But this is where Tolkien was writing Lord of the Rings and inspired what's known as high fantasy. So fantasy that's supposed to take you away from this world. Yeah, but no worries. It's fantasy that's supposed to take you away from the world, the worries of life, the worries of industry, working, career, and kind of read something that takes you out of it and just makes you kind of happy or takes you on an epic journey. On the other hand, you have Michael Moorcock, the British author, who would start his new world science fiction line and new wave science fiction. And his purpose was stories are not supposed to be fun, they're not supposed to be happy, they're supposed to do something to change your mind. The purpose of stories is to stimulate the mind, supposed to make you think of something that you haven't thought of before. This was a time when the atomic threat was big, when we were venturing into space where we had new knowledge. So stories shouldn't be nice and cozy and sentimental. They should be something that wakes us up and makes us try to change our current conditions we're living in. So this is where you gotta get a division within authors of storytelling. Am I writing this story because I really want to tell this fun story, something to take you away from the worries of this world? Or do I want to write something that's meant to influence people, that's meant to cause uprisings or inspire new change?
Or just make you crave honey.
Actually, if you're interested in that, Michael Moorcock wrote a essay called "The Epic Poo," where he compares. it's not in that context. He compares Lord of Rings to Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh wakes up, he goes on a fun adventure, but at the end, he's always nice and happy in his cozy bed. He kind of compares Lord of the Rings and the high fantasy genre that spawned in that same category.
Winnie the Pooh is Bilbo back.
So the next card we have is the Lust card. And as in Lust, this represents the summer of love. This is when we started seeing the counterculture of the 60s, which was inspired by the Beat generation of the 50s. This is where you had works like Allen Ginsberg Howe, William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch, Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And for the comics industry, you started seeing the birth of underground comics like Robert Crumb and his Fritz the Cat series. This is also where they started trying to take medium underground. So they started to make their own movies outside the control of studios, make their own comics outside the control of DC and Marvel, and try to write their own books that didn't really weren't constricted to any previous literary idea or definition. One of the interesting works that came out around this time was known as the Air Pirates. If you don't know about the Air Pirates, this is a very, very important work, especially if you are an artist or creator within the fandom. Danny O'Neill, he published his own series of Mickey Mouse comics, fan fiction, where he had Mickey Mouse kind of doing mature-rated things. They were kind of trafficking drugs and doing other stuff I don't want to talk about since I think there's little kiddies in the room. But what he did was write stories that were supposed to deconstruct what was known as classic Americana. When you look at what defines America, he thought the Mickey Mouse symbol was that. And this is where we get the first time where copyrights became a big issue, because before then, when we had Star Trek and Doctor Who, people were making their own fan comics, making their own fan fiction, and people were okay with that. But now, Disney had an argument saying, well, my kid reading this comic might mistake it for an actual licensed Disney comic. So this is not okay, we have to sue. And this is where studios became fiercely protective of their copyrights. If you, of course, know about Hasbro and how they deal with bronies in the community creating their own artwork, this is really where it started. So you could blame Disney, but specifically Danny O'Neill, because Danny O'Neill purposely wanted Disney to get pissed off at him. He was the one who mailed them comics. He sent them, and what he ended up doing was, one of his friends was the son of a Disney board director. He had him put the comic in, before the board meeting started, he had them put the comic on the table and had them read it. And he wasn't really smart because he said they will never find us in our secret hideout. He put the address to his hideout in every single newspaper and magazine. So Disney found him right away and sued him. But this is where we get what is known as what's now known as the Mickey Mouse copyright protection law, where now properties and companies can have rights over their characters if it's not in fair use.
For multiple generations.
Parody is fair use.
Parody, it depends. Parody and satire are in fair use, but under definition of the Supreme Court. Actually, I think it might, okay, I don't have it in this panel, in this presentation, but someone wrote a sequel to Catcher in the Rye. Even though it was kind of a satire or parody, it was not approved by the Supreme Court because all he was doing was just continuing the exact same story that was started in Catcher in the Rye. It didn't really add anything new. Parody and satire is only allowed if it's transformative. This is where I'm talking about the evolution of art. If you add something new that wasn't there before, telling the exact same story but having the main character in Catcher in the Rye as an older man isn't really transforming anything. However, someone wrote a parody of Gone with the Wind called The Wind Done Gone, in which the story was told by the perspective of one of the slaves. And by doing that, you add new context and new insight to the previously existing story. And by that definition, it was transformative. So a lot of the...
Like an early Wicked.
Yeah. A lot of the fan fiction and fan art you see in this fandom now, you wouldn't really call it transformative. It arguably, Hasbro could shut it down. However, I'm not sure. Do we have any fan artists we could think of that...
What, fanfic writers? Or artists?
Or like any artists? I would argue that maybe Friendship is Witchcraft is something that's transformative. Hockity Diggity Demons, Dot Move
Hasbro
series.
doesn't seem to think so.
But
Neither
it has
does
to be
YouTube.
transformative. It has to add something new. I'm working on the story that you might like that kind of talks about that, but I'll say that for later. So we're going to quickly move.
I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. That one's pretty. That one's pretty out there.
Oh, I never read Fall.
I know. I've not read that one, but I've met KK.
But okay, so let's quickly move on because I want to get to where you all want to go to. You guys want to get to the pony part. So we're going to quickly speed through these things. The next card we have is a Hangman, also known as a trader card. This is when studios, before this era, this is when we had an era of New Hollywood. This is when independent filmmakers would back their own movies. They would raise all the funds for their own movies. It took a long time, but hey, they had free creative control. They kind of made the deal with the devil when they said, hey, studios, if you finance our films, we will produce you a great film. And studios are like, okay, we'll do that, but we have creative control over your content. This is where you now start, like as with the comic book industry being constricted to superheroes, this is where you see the film industry now being constricted to studio management. But this is also where we get a new concept in film. Before then, a film was released, it would play in theaters, and that's kind of it. This is where we got the idea of what's known as a summer blockbuster, where films became insanely popular, becoming one of the largest grossing mediums until the video game industry. But when they realized, hey, all we had to do was just produce a sequel every summer, we could start getting money. This is when the film industry really took a shift from artistic innovation to more material-based, based on finances and money.
Star Trek 8.
So basically,
So very tired.
yeah,
Star
this is
Wars
the,
Chewbacca
where
edition.
film went from, again, transformative to
2 hours of
transformative
wiki
art
dialogue
to
and no
more of
subtitles.
what's basically a product. At this point, it is a product. It's not art by that definition. And while Star Wars is what the original Star Wars was great because Lucas had full control over it, and he kind of created a structure in which now directors had to cozy up to studios, and it really influenced how the film was created. But Red Letter Media talks about Lucas all the time. Google them if you're interested. But we're going to quickly move on to
Red Letter Media.
now this is where we get started. We are now at 1986. This is 75 years before the since the start of our journey, and now we're 5 years before My Little Pony. This is where everything falls into place, especially for My Little Pony. So as I was saying with the comic book industry, you had people growing up on the Silver Age superheroes like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Avengers, JLA, and we had a new era of comic books known as the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age was basically made up of fans of the Silver Age who wanted to retell their favorite Silver Age stories. So basically, comic books became inbreeding, basically photocopying the exact same superheroes and stories over and over again. You started seeing this with every single medium. Film became cheaper and cheaper
Green Lanterns blasting off again.
to save more money. Cartoons, which are supposed to be animated and very lively, became really, really dull and constrictive because they wanted to save money by basically repeating the exact same things over and over again.
Always go for the premium package.
For the comic book industry, it basically looked like nearly the end. The comic book industry was on its last legs until this one specific year, 1986, in which Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, Art Spiegelman's Mouse,
I don't remember.
and Alan Moore's Watchmen came onto the fray. So Alan Moore's idea was this. Superheroes are obviously killing comics. Comics are a unique form of storytelling. You could use visuals and images in a way that you can't tell in a regular traditional book or a film. There are things you could only do with panels and word bubbles that can only be done in this specific medium. And if we are stuck to just writing superhero comics over and over again, it's going to be a death for our medium. We need to start writing new types of stories. And the only way to move away from superheroes are to finally kill the superhero genre once and for all. So it was in his intent with Watchmen to finally deconstruct the superhero genre to its core to finish it off. However, it had the exact opposite effect. People liked the grim, dark superheroes that he created, and he ended up creating the Dark Age of comics. He was hoping to create the Renaissance. He created the Dark Ages, because now people are just retelling the exact same thing he was telling in Watchmen.
And then it ended up making a big superhero movie, and then he got really angry.
So Alan Moore, so across the ocean, Alan Moore is a writer in Britain. Across the ocean in another island nation in Japan, you had another figure who was upset with the anime industry. The anime industry at this time was reliant on the mecha suit genre and space opera. This author felt that if the anime industry was just reliant on the suit giant robot genre, then it's going to obviously fail. We had some interesting works. We had Akira, we had the Miyazaki films, which were supposed to kind of reinvent things. But if we're stuck with giant robots, it's not going to work. So this person created Evangelion. And this was meant to finally finish, like with Alan Moore, Watchmen was supposed to finish the superhero genre. This was supposed to kill the mecha suit genre once and for all. But like Watchmen, it spawned a whole entire new movement of mecha suit animes. However, something interesting happened. Miyazaki was inspired by Disney. He loved the Disney films, the innovation that happened. His films slowly started making their way back to America. And when they made their way back to America, the same Disney animators who inspired him initially now could see, hey, he created something new with that. We should do that. We shouldn't be creating the exact same films over and over again. In fact, at this time period, Disney was about to finally close its animation studio once and for all. They were bankrupt, animation wasn't making any money. They wanted to do a nice little farewell to the animation industry because other studios with films like American Tail and Land Before Time were now overtaking Disney in the box office. So Disney was like, okay, let's do a film where we get all our favorite cartoon characters. Let's ask Warner Brothers to bring in some of the cartoon characters. And then we'll just kind of do a nice farewell to the animation industry now that we're finally setting up shop, closing up shop. And they created Who Framed Roger Rabbit. However, unlike Alan Moore and Evangelion, they started something that made them money. And when they made them money, now they could create something new. And they were able to fund Little Mermaid the next year. And this is where we move to the next card. The art card is also synonymous with the Renaissance. Now we are in what is known as the animation Renaissance, 80 years past the start of our journey. Not just Japanese anime and Disney animation, but now this is where we have the 90s cartoons. Heavily inspired by this man, John Kay. He's very similar to Alan Moore in his opinion that animations and cartoons could do things that no other medium can. Why he really doesn't like Pixar or DreamWorks films because they look too realistic. He always argues, if you're going to make something look realistic, why don't you just film it? The point of cartoons are to be cartoony. The point of animation is to be animated. So we must make something that's unique to this medium. That's why when you look at his storyboards for his creation, all his characters are never redrawn the same way twice. Each frame is vividly different. This is where we get the rebirth of animation. We have Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Toon Disney creating the new shows we love. This is where Lauren Faust really got her start. However, with all these films making money, all these movies making money, what's going to happen? So the devil card is not, it's not something that's evil. Devil just represents materialism. When I talk about materialism, I talk about money as the main goal. Now, this is really good because we have Transformers, Terminator, Jurassic Park, Toy Story, Titanic. These are films that are making use of new innovations and technologies that money can buy. This is the first time CGI was being used. This is where we get brand new television shows that kind of, hey, let's not make some static character. Let's kind of create new types of characters. This is where we had the comics crash and boom. This is where we used the money that we made and invested it into new technologies to now create new storytellings. This is also where we see the birth of franchises. The biggest one to come out around this time period is Harry Potter. This is where we started saying, hey, stories don't have to be constricted to one medium. We don't have to just tell it as a novel series or a comic series. We can now adapt into a film, into a television. We can make a lot of money doing this. And this is where we really get the start of brand new franchises.
Was anyone here who was 11 when the first Harry Potter book came out?
Ugh.
Where's your letter, huh?
I'm old.
However, as we continue going, we're now 99 years past the start of our journey. It's now 2001. The Lightning Struck Tower is considered the worst card in the deck. It represents sudden change And when you look at the symbol for television, the symbol for television is a tower of lightning coming out of it. When you look at the tower card, it's lightning striking a tower. This is where we start seeing shows shift to more grim, gritty reality. TV shows before then were fun, I Love Lucy type sitcoms. Now we're moving to things that kind of tell the reality of our world. One of the big things to influence this was when the Twin Towers fell on 9/11. This is when we started seeing shows like The West Wing, Sopranos, Law and Order kind of take this medium to, okay, let's not tell something that's escapism. Let's tell something that relays the truth in a harsh way.
Jersey Shore.
One very, very important work was The Wire. I'm now studying at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and The Wire is a very, very big film inspired by Baltimore. In fact, the mayor of Baltimore is very upset because he says, why does LA, New York, and Miami get cool cop shows and we get a cop show that shows corruption and discord? Well, it's because that's the truth. This is reality.
It's cheaper to film there if it's already happening.
And this is something...
Baltimore is automatically terrible.
That's true. And this is actually something very interesting because before then, literature finally became... Before then, television was never considered an art form. Literature was considered art form when Ulysses was written. Film became an art form when Citizen Kane was filmed. Watchmen was considered, made comics considered an art form when Watchmen was created. Until now, television has never been considered an art form. Like comic books were considered an art form, but not television. It was when The Wire and Sopranos came out that this is when we got a whole new birth of AMC, HBO style shows Breaking Bad that basically tried to push this medium to what's known as an art form. Now I'm going to quickly go through here. This is star card. It means ray of hope. As you can see, Twilight Sparkle's cutie mark is right there.
Right there.
Right there. This is where we get now a rebirth in creation of new mediums, because up to this point, the only things we were talking about were novels, comic books, film, television. That's it. You had nothing new. I would argue that video games are also considered in this list, but since video games, the main focus is gameplay and not storytelling, I'm talking about these four mediums specifically. However, we did get a new medium born in Japan around this time called the visual novel. It was born in within the video game industry and medium, but when it shifted to storytelling as its primary focus, this is when it became known as a new artistic medium.
However, sadly, today they're mostly known as dating.
Yeah, dating sims. However, they are a unique art form because they combine the good things of every single medium. You have the length of a novel with the unique prose and text. You have the balance between text and images like a comic book. You have the use of soundtrack and sound effects like a film, and you have time to grow with characters like a television show. It was when Clannad was released in 2004 that now the visual novel industry was now, a brand new industry was now considered a true art form. And visual novels, Clannad, for example, has even been added to like the 100 Pieces of Mankind. So this is how you see how important these art forms are to our existence as humans. Now I'm going to quickly go over the next few cards. So the moon card represents kind of depression, darkness, and confusion. This is when we kind of get into an era of laziness and decline. You obviously notice after 2004, cartoons on Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney kind of becoming more and more stale as they started utilizing more Flash more and more. Instead of being more animated and cartoony, it was just kind of, once again, stiff like in the 80s. CGI, which was previously used to enhance film, was now being used
as a crutch.
Yeah, as a crutch. This is where we have rehashed franchises over and over again. Everything was focused on money. Seth MacFarlane, Michael Bay, horrible, horrible people. You should not be reading or watching their works. I'm not going to talk about her. Okay. So,
moving swiftly along.
As we're looking at every single era, after every dark age, we always have something new. After this kind of decline, we now kind of see like a new ray of hope. In 2008, everyone's talking about change, you know, Obama, I don't know. But anyways, This is where the
Abolishing
Clannad...
the penny. Abolish the penny. Abolish the
This
penny.
is where the Clannad anime was adapted from the visual novel. This is where we have reinvention of the superhero film with Dark Knight. We had the brand new television shows that were done in this unique style like Breaking Bad. This is where we had new types of stories like Homestuck, trying to make use of new mediums. Oh man, let's see. Okay. Breaking Bad, blah, blah, blah. We all like Breaking Bad. That goes good too. Oh yeah, I think it's Switch cards.
You ever noticed that two of the biggest shows of the past 5 years, Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, are on the home box office and the American Movie Channel? And those are the TV shows that we watch. Weird, right?
Okay, so now we're coming to the conclusion of our journey. So the Chinese Revolution was started with the sun flag. We are now at the sun card. And what's the symbol of Equestria and Celestia? It's the sun. So it's kind of symbolic that 100 years after Peter Pan and Chinese Revolution, we now see the release of episode 1 of the new Gen 4 of My Little Pony. This is now where we get from the animation decline to now the animation revival. We started seeing new shows on Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney.
And
like
Steven!
Like, we had regular show, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, Over the Garden Wall. Things that try to make use, bring us back to the same era of the animation renaissance. Instead of making cartoons that were specifically constricted to money, we're trying to create shows that were actually good. And this is where everyone asks me, what's the deal with bronies? Why are all these college-age people fans of a show that's obviously for kids? It makes perfect sense. Every single, a majority of bronies were born in the 90s. During the 90s, this is where we saw the Watchmen Dark Ages. This is also where we saw the animation renaissance. Almost every single generation would say, my generation was the best. No, every other generation after me is crap. But this is also where we get YouTube and the internet. So the 90s generation could say cartoons of our generation were the best, and we could look at shows existing on YouTube and say, this is the proof. It's better than shows that are coming out post-2004. It's better than shows that were around during the 80s. They are. Yes, and also coincidentally, again, we started with Peter Pan. This is the generation that's known as the Peter Pan generation. They became born in an era where the baby boomers basically sucked all the money out of everything, and now most people in this generation are dealing with student loans, trying to find a job. So they're obviously going to be down their luck. They're obviously going to want some form of escapism to take them away from their lives. So what's better than reliving the nostalgia of your childhood than by looking at these new cartoons that remind them of this? So when people ask me, what's the deal with bronies? It makes perfect sense. Look at the era they were born in and look what's happening in the context of the time of when the show was released. So here we go. Now our journey comes back to Lauren Faust. My Little Pony, what she did was you all know what she did. She took something that should have been crude. Flash animation is the crudest form of animation. She took it and made it look lively. She took something that was purely a commercial, toy commercial, something that was a product, something that was the butt joke of culture for the last 20 years and actually made it something good. She took characters that were supposed to be flat and one-dimensional, conforming to certain tropes, and kind of reimagined them and say, hey, they're more well-rounded. They're more rounded than what these tropes were supposed to be. Of course, now we have like the new show. We're not really sure if this is continuing Lauren Faust's original legacy.
She's confirmed it hasn't.
Yeah, but when she started, the first season at least tried to take the kids medium and make it something unique and new. And this is what inspired basically the fandom. Like what I was saying, the purpose of fandom is to be inspired by something and try to innovate, transform what previously came before. This is where we had a new birth with the animation revival and also fans. The purpose of fans, if you're a fan artist, a fan musician, creator, it is great to try and if you're down your luck and you are inspired by My Little Pony, that is great. You should be inspired by that. That should be a spark to reignite your life. However, it should not become life itself. It should not become a crutch. The purpose of fandom is to inspire you to do something and create your own unique thing. When you create something new and unique, you now create a new form of storytelling, a new form of medium. So now we are at the very, very last card, the world card. This is the current era we're in now. This is when video games are now becoming the largest money-making medium in the world. This is when social media and online databases like YouTube and Tumblr and DeviantArt make it accessible for us to share information back and forth. This is where we have new experimentation. Comic books, which were just printed in the exact same size over and over again, when they were made digital, they basically just scanned all those pages and use the exact same format. We have things like Comixology and Graphically that actually try to make use of the comic medium in this new digital format. We have House of Cards. Before then, television shows were constricted to 22 minutes or 44 minutes to fill in for commercial times. Now we have shows created exclusively for streaming or Netflix that could be as long or as short as they need to be. We have things like Rewrite, a new type of visual novel that try to get away from the dating sim type aspect and actually add something new. So this is really an era we're in full of potential, like the Fool card. It's an era of potential where we have a chance to try to create new things. We have a chance to become inspired. And if we keep up, yes, okay, 5 minutes. So if we keep up the way we're going, we could either fall into two paths. We could go back into escapism, inbreeding art over and over again, or we could try to expand and create art that is a stimulant to kind of push culture to its new era. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'll be taking questions and answers right now.
So,
thank you. You first?
So it does confirm the Illuminati is real. I mean, how could I name that?
The Illuminati?
Illuminati, clearly.
Actually, it was aliens.
No, it was Illuminalians.
Illuminalians.
Any other questions? Or? Yes.
Aliens that glow.
I would say it's the same thing.
You're
if
just
you were
weird.
No, it's the same. It's the same thing. Most people who are bronies are normally people who are down on their luck, who are kind of struggling in the world,
Generally
who
speaking,
need
this is
something
not
to kind of
necessarily.
spark new nostalgia in them.
I feel great.
Most people were sparked by a sense of new creativity. So it's something that's supposed to make you happy. It's and what's unique is most people, when they partake in escapism, it's just purely escapism. My Little Pony actually did something that tried to change social consciousness. Before then, most people wouldn't consider a girls' show that had fighting and action and adventure. But now that, so instead of being like, for example, if you read a high fantasy novel, you look at things that really couldn't exist in the world and that's it, you kind of go with it. We were very, very lucky that ponies came around because instead of just falling to the same escapism fandom that people always fall into, now it's also a movement where, hey, let's actually try to raise money for charity. Let's actually try to help with social betterment, all this stuff. Yes?
When's your book being published?
I'm not sure if it could be, as you can see, it is a bit disjointed. Even though I've been doing this for about 4 years, it is very complex because I'm looking at 5 different mediums, at least 20 different genres over a period of 100 years. And including tarot, so it does get confusing, but I might publish it as a comic someday.
Buy his book.
You had your hand raised, yes.
So for, again, tarot is very old and like Western tradition, as well as the history you told is for America.
Yes.
Have you seen any sort of patterns either with tarot or with another tradition in other cultures?
For example, in Western culture, like I'm Taoist, we use the I Ching. That's another form of divination. In fact, if I want to talk about that, I could connect the 64 hexagrams to the 64 codons of DNA. In fact, this is something actually for a new book I'm writing on. I'm actually fascinated by what's considered an element in different cultures. In the West, we have 4 elements: earth, fire, water, air. In the East, we have 5 elements: gold, wood, earth, fire, and water. However, 3 of them are mutual. So if you combine the Western elements and the Eastern elements, you have exactly 6 elements, and they're all balanced within harmony. Again, going back to the Greek philosophy of the sphere of harmonies. And if you think about the sphere of harmonies, it makes sense. The Greek philosophy is every single thing in the universe, from the stars to the earth to every single living organism, vibrates at its own unique frequency, at its unique harmony. Look at string theory now. When we look at quantum mechanics, when you break the human body, when you break every single organism and matter back down to its purest essential, it's an atom. When you break an atom down, it's vibrating strings. That's an abstract concept. At that point, a thought and this table are the exact same thing when you look at string theory, just vibrations in different harmonies. Yes?
So,
Yeah, don't bother.
But who's pulling the string?
20 years after this last slide, you mentioned that there are like, 2 different paths that you could have gone down.
Yep.
And the thing you've said is that like there's kind of like the light age and the dark age. So what are your thoughts? Like, if you were to make another slide here, have we gone a light age or a dark age?
Well, we could look at 2 points.
Doing well, do you think that ponies has become too inbred and that like, people have indeed?
I may make some people angry if I answer your question, but
Well, not too long ago we had Johnny Test, and now we have Over the Garden Wall. So that's a pretty huge improvement.
Yeah, Over the Garden Wall, we have Steven Universe, new types of shows. Like now, Disney and the Cartoon Network are gambling on these new My Little Pony type shows because of My Little Pony.
We will not
However,
talk about Uncle Grandpa.
To be honest, when I started in this fandom 4 years ago, I was hoping that all these people creating new comics, new animation, that I would see at least a few of them now creating their own show. At this point, that has not happened yet. We have not seen one person in this fandom go on to create their own new show. The closest we have, I think, is Mystery Ben when he made that Mystery Skulls music video. But at this point, most people are just reusing. I would say if Hasbro continues the cease and desist letter, and you can't legally sell it outside of conventions, then you haven't created something new yet. I haven't seen something within the pony fandom that could be legally sold or would be free from Hasbro copyright because it falls under the definition of transformation.
But then again, many artists have been inspired by the pony fandom and pony works and created works outside of the artistic field or within architecture or product design.
And with that, I will sadly have to conclude the panel because I think it looks like my time is up. But thank you very much for everything.
Stay inspired.
Hope you enjoy the rest.